Alright, so let's get started with the first lesson. We're going to talk a little bit about CSS syntax and the style tag. So I just want you to take a look at this page right here. You could always flip out to see the rest of the code, but I have it all extended here because I just want to show you how we're going to break down learning CSS. So all you need to know for now is that we created this element, h4. We learned how to make that in the previous lesson. And there's a little bit of new syntax here, but ultimately I want you to see that we're calling a property and value. It's all that we're doing with CSS. The brackets just tell it, just kind of hold it in place, and then there's some memorization that we'll have to do here, right? So a memorization alert. But for now, if you follow me, we're just saying that there's an h4, and we'd like to change the color to blue. Now, what do we know in that statement? We know what an h4 is. We know the word color, but we're not sure what kind of color it means, and we know the word blue. So we can see that this text up here is this h4 that we're referencing. So let's just see what happens when we just change the color. Looks like black is the color by default. If we try red, it turns to red. Yellow, yellow. Let's try a hex value of white. You can still kind of see it back there because the background is actually a little off-white. Let's just try a couple random numbers. Looks like that's yellow. Change this to 1. Maybe we'll change this to H or C. Change this to C. We got a little bit of an orange. How about lime? Thought I knew one called bad. Forget how that one goes. B-A-D-A-S-S. Definitely not that. 5-5. Anyway, it appears that color, which is going to be the first property we learned today, refers to the text color of an element. In this case, the h4 we've written up there. So that's one property and value for something in the whole statement. It's called a CSS rule. And we're effectively telling the computer, hey, take the h4s and turn their color, which we know stands for the text color, change all the h4s that you see and change the color to red. Now over here, I actually have a much more specific rule. I want you to take the div p nth child 1, but don't worry about that. That was just for the ease of the example for this lesson. But effectively, each one of these are going to refer to the element directly above it. So we can learn how to use a couple of these. Really, we're just focusing on the properties and values. And even then, we're going to be going in one by one later on. But as a preview, just wanted to run through some important ones, the ones that we're going to be learning in this lesson. So next one's background color, and that one's actually easy to understand. We have the background color of the element. Notice how it stretches all the way out. Keep that in mind when we talk about display block and display inline elements. So background color red, same thing as before. We change it to blue, red, black, white, red, color. Let's see if this works. I don't think it will. Blue. Hey, it does. So we can combine styles, but as you can see, this is not, eventually we're going to learn how to write this correctly or write it more simply. But for now, we're effectively saying this element right here, let's turn the background color red. And the background color is the property, and the value could be whatever color you can think of. Now we're going to change the font size. Also easy. Not every property, not every aspect of it, CSS and HTML is exactly what you think it is. Like for example, when we learn what divs are, spans, those don't like scream out what they are. But in the case of background color and font size, you kind of know what you're getting. All you got to remember is that this is case sensitive, and you got to remember this little hyphen. But that comes with time. If you just type in font size CSS, you'll be reminded what the syntax is, which is in this case just font dash size. And 30 pixels, we'll talk about pixels and rems and EMs, but what you need to know now is that when you set when you don't set a font size, it reverts to a default size, which is 16 pixels. So that's your starting point to try to understand what the pixels are. But I would recommend just like playing around with it until you get a feel for it, so that you know if you really want to go big, you're going to have to bring this number up by a lot. But anyway, that's the value for the property font size. It takes pixels, so 16 pixels, or 1 REM, which is the same value, or 1 EM. But for now, let's just focus on pixels, and that's what 10 pixels looks like. Text decoration, sometimes we use this as a way to remove an underline from an element, for example, a link element. But in this case, we have text decoration underline. There's lots of values to this. We will get into this on an individual lesson, but we can do line through. If I spell through right, boom. What is it? Overline. There you go. And underline. Next is a border. Now, borders can be a little confusing because it's actually a shortcut. So perhaps we'll do the stretched out version first. But in this case, we're going to give border 3 values right back to back. Solid, blue, 1px. Now the solid is mandatory, and by default, it's going to give you a bit of a thicker than 1px on all 4 sides, but the color is going to be black. And we could change that to red, and then change the width of the lines to anything that we want. And we could actually do this in different order. So we could do red, solid, 1px. Takes a little bit of getting used to, but effectively what you're doing is the following. Let's see if I can remember it. Border, style, solid, great. Then border, color, red, and border, width, 10px. So when you write solid red 10px, you don't have to write style, color, or width, because there's a shorthand to some of these properties, and this one's a pretty useful one. I use border pretty much every single day that I'm coding. It's really helpful to just figure out where things are by adding this rule. So just get used to the fact that border is not only very commonly used, but there's this nice easy shorthand, or you could do it the long way if you want. Then changing the font, which I had a little bit of trouble with last time I was trying to teach it, because the built-in fonts behave differently and they have these other values. Pretty much just using the font family and learning the syntax font-family and just changing it a couple times, I think will do for now and for later when we get into it. But just changing it a couple times just to see the power of it. See, that one doesn't work. I'm not sure why. Georgia. Okay. And last but not least, let's just throw a bunch of these together. You can see that it has a border of red, solid 1px. It has a max width, which we can read. That one we can understand. It's the maximum width. So this is what 200 pixels looks like. Background color of this hex value, which we can take means this grayish color. Has color white, which is the text right there. Then a couple we haven't talked about, but I'm going to briefly show, but we're not going to get into it until the next lesson. We have padding top, padding bottom, margin top, padding left. Let's see what happens when we do padding top 0. Pay attention to this area right here. So we can see that the padding is the inside of this box, and padding bottom, what do you think is going to happen there? If you said that this area will now disappear, you're right. And it seems to have a padding left. That's got to be over here. So if we bring that to 0, looks like this is by default. That's probably because of the max width. So if we remove this, max width 0px, no. What I want is actually this. Oops. See, now instead of a maximum width of 200 pixels, it's going to extend the whole way. And last but not least, let's see what this margin top is. If the padding was the inside of the box, margin top is probably going to mean the outside of the box. And it has 4 sides, but we're only doing it to the top hand side. That's why there's this big weird gap here. If we change this to 0 or even 10, you can see that it shoots back up. So again, we're going to go through all of these individually, but I just wanted to show you the power of just getting our properties and values and syntactically correct, because you can start seeing changes right away on this page. And the way to do that is we're going to build a style tag, which we're going to have to learn how to build, but it's just like the p tag or anything, and it holds these rules on the inside. We're going to look at that later, but for your challenge right now, I just want you to read this. The style tag is how we begin writing CSS styles. CSS styles are usually kept in an external file, but this will work for now. Any CSS code that you put within the style tag will affect that HTML document. Try it out for yourself, but of course you have to pick a selector. In this case, we're going to choose one called HTML. So before we were picking H4s and these specific divs, but let's see what happens when we choose the HTML selector, which we haven't seen yet, but I'm going to tell you, it's just the whole thing, your entire page, every element on it. And if we saw that this was affecting this because it was related directly to this element, and this one was directly related to this H4, HTML is going to affect the entire document, everything. So first thing we do is call our selector, like we did over here. And next we're going to add these brackets. You can try this out for yourself too, right here. And then we're going to just add background color line. I want you to practice writing it out. Background color with the semicolon, and then as soon as I type in this E, it's all going to turn green. So I just want you to make sure you're getting the syntax right. And remember that the semicolon at the end will be mandatory, but you're about to see everything turn lime. And that's pretty much it for this lesson. It's a lot of stuff going on at once, but we're going to go through each one of these properties individually. And we'll make references to some of the things we're going to learn in the following week when we do layout. But for now, as long as you, in the next lesson, really drill down on the syntax with the brackets and the colon and the semicolon and the name of the properties and the possible values, you should be in good shape to writing styles, and it's a lot more fun than HTML. So I highly recommend just memorizing a couple of things and then you're off and running. Let's see what's next. Yep, we're going to get into the actual syntax and really try to memorize this, but that's in the next one. I will see you there.